Okay, so the shiur today we're going to learn about special mitzvot that are connected specifically to the land of Israel and that are relevant in the land of Israel only. And I say this because, in a sense, all of the mitzvot are directly connected to Eretz Israel, and the whole process of receiving the mitzvot at Har Sinai was such in which it was all preparation for going into the land of Israel. So much so that we'll see soon a source in the Talmud which asks, well, maybe all of the mitzvot are connected directly to the land, and maybe um, as a nation, and a nation having a land is so integral to our identity, and the Torah which connects us to, and the mitzvot which connect us to the Torah and to Hashem are very specific to the land. And in a sense, even though we're going to talk about specific mitzvot today, in a sense, this is true. I'll give you a few examples of mitzvot that are connected to the nation and to the land. For example, we have a mitzvah that when we come to the land, then we shall have a king. So this is very obvious, right? That this is a mitzvah. It's not a personal, it's not an individual mitzvah that any of us can do, but it's a mitzvah that is connected to the nation, but also to the land, because you can have the largest Jewish community in the world, be it in Paris, in New York, or in Copenhagen, maybe one day, right? But it won't help because a king obviously represents the nation, right, and represents the land where the people are. So in that sense, it's very obvious that specifically when we talk about mitzvot in general, they're very much connected to the land of Israel because it's the place that we have as a nation. So that's just a general a general overlook when we look at the mitzvot that are connected to the land. Now I'm going to jump to the practical, and then we're going to go from the one to the other in the shiur. But when I was preparing the shiur, so the book that that we follow in the shiur is, so we have a Hebrew version and an English version. Interestingly enough, when I open the Hebrew version and there's a special section, and when we start talking about kashrut, the entire first section of the Hebrew section is connected to mitzvot that are connected to the land. Whereas in the English version, that only comes as a subsection in the middle. Why is that so? Because the English version, right, that they put out, they're assuming that people in the diaspora are going to be reading the English version. And many of the mitzvot there that are connected, daily mitzvot that we have in the land of Israel today, are not relevant or hardly relevant in the diaspora, which is something also to think of, that for many years, right, for close to 2,000 years, the majority of the Jewish community was not able to keep all of these mitzvot. And then when we started coming back to the land, not only, I would say, a few hundred years ago, not only pre-Zionism and then at the beginning of the Zionist movement, there were many religious people involved. The notion that this was just a secularist, right, movement is untrue. A lot of that was wiped from history, but we're not going to have a history lesson. But there were many rabbis involved in the pioneering movement of Zionism in the late 19th century. And they were asking questions. They were even worried about, wait, how are we going to keep the mitzvot? We've lost it. We don't know how to do it because we always know mitzvot from looking what our grandmother does in the kitchen. But what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? And then we have certain mitzvot that have to do with the whole nation for an entire year, like the Shmita, the sabbatical year. And it became a huge rabbinical discussion about how are we going to actually do this? How are we going to keep the mitzvot, but also an excitement there because we're finally able to keep these mitzvot that we haven't been able to keep for so long because we were exiled from the land. So again, I'm jumping from the philosophical to the practical, but that's, I think, where we are in this shiur. On the one hand, the nation being connected to the land is something ideological, spiritual, philosophical, but it's also very, very practical. So when we're going to discuss the specific mitzvot, but as we do so, Sophie, if you can open and I'm going to make you a co-host, and then you can share the sheet. Okay, thank you so much. Perfect. So many times throughout the Torah, we have a unique phrase, which is when Hashem has brought you into the land of the Canaanites, or when Hashem brings you to the land. So this, in a sense, is when Hashem is giving the mitzvot, and some of these mitzvot are in Exodus, and some of them are in Leviticus, and many, or the majority of them are in the final book of Moses, right, in Deuteronomy, where Moshe Rabbeinu is preparing the people to go into the land, right? This is after 40 years. They've been in the desert. He's about to pass on. And okay, what's going to be now when you finally go into the land? Because the status of the people changes when you have your own land, when you have as a nation, you have your own place, which also brings forward the question that we're going to see. Okay, well, the Torah says, when you go into the land, then you shall have the mitzvot. Well, some of the mitzvot, for example, that are mentioned there are Pesach. Another one of the mitzvot are Tefillin, right? We have mitzvot that are not specifically connected to the land that use this phrase of Ki yaviacha Hashem el Eretz Aknani, when Hashem brought you into the land of the Canaanites. So if we go down to the source, so the Talmud in Kiddushin, the tractate of Kiddushin, asks on page 36, the Mishnah says as follows: any mitzvah that is dependent on the land applies only in Eretz Israel. And any mitzvah that is not dependent on the land applies both in Eretz Israel and outside of Eretz Israel. So before we go forward, how do you understand the Mishnah? What does it mean? What could this meaning mean to be dependent on the land? Anyone, if you'd how do you understand? Just reading the Mishnah, it's a simple Mishnah. Any mitzvah that is dependent on the land. What does dependency mean, in your opinion?
I would think at least something that maybe grows in the land, like food.
Okay,
Fruits and
so something that is so something that is directly connected to the land, food. Okay. Any other opinions? Anyone else? Thank you, Meir. What does dependency on a land mean? In what way are we dependent? Yes, please, Florian. You can just unmute yourself.
Yes.
What does dependency mean?
But
Yeah.
for example, if you are in Israel, you face towards Jerusalem, or if you are in Jerusalem, you face toward Beit Midrash, the Beit Hamikdash, and when you are in Europe, for example, like depending on you being on the land.
Okay, so you're saying, so we're hearing two different opinions here, right? You're saying something which is more dependent on where you are as a person. In other words, if I am in the land, then I will have such mitzvah, which, whereas Meir is saying, it's connected to the physical land itself, right? It's something which grows on the land. Anyone else want to join our Beit Midrash discussion? It's okay to argue. What does dependency mean? Or maybe that's a question for you also. Do you feel dependent on Israel? Is Israel dependent on you? Does being Jewish mean that you are dependent on Israel? Yes, Esther.
No, yes, we are dependent on Israel. And I miss Israel all the time because anytime when I have gone there and stayed there a long time, I feel connection there and I miss that connection. And I feel like I'm a half a person without Eretz. And I'm waiting eagerly for the Beit HaMikdash to be built because then we can really do everything. And after the conversion, of course, I have to be converted and become a real Jew. But it's very special land. Even though there is Chayalim everywhere, I still feel there is peace. And I love Jerusalem a lot. That is how I feel the connection. And of course, Torah is giving that connection also, taking us there with the word.
Okay, so for if I translate what you're saying, then Eretz Israel for you serves as a spiritual center, right? That even if you're living elsewhere, you feel connected to that. It's like a heart, and you feel connected to it. So we've heard our three different opinions here on what is dependency. Benny, you want to please go ahead?
Well, we are dependent on Israel to be a safe space for us. If something happens, then we can always go back to our home.
So let me ask you, just to make it clearer, Benny, what if you know that there are ideas even today that will have less problems as a nation if we just set it up elsewhere. So, right, what if we set Israel up in Uganda, and there was a very strong, powerful superpower army and had the backing of the whole world, because we wouldn't have the conflict of the Middle East? Would that
Yeah,
still serve the same, or is there something unique about the history of the land?
we have Mount Zion, so that's the unique, in my opinion, on it. It wouldn't be the same if we were not connected to Mount Zion, to where we had our, let's say, Moses had the meeting with Elohim. So no matter where else in the world, if it's in America, if it's in Uganda, if it's in far east of Russia, I know there's also some Jewish settlements there that were talked about back in the days, but it won't. In my opinion, it wouldn't be the same. But that's my opinion. But again, I feel like our connection is to Mount Zion. That's why also we are Zionists, and we believe in the state of Israel. So that's my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much. So we hear different opinions on what is dependency, but as this is a shiur halacha and the Mishnah is also connected to halacha, so there's obviously, what does this mean halachically? What are the mitzvot that we actually are not, you can say, are not even obligated towards if we are not in the land? And we heard either physically, does it mean that I need to be standing in the land, or is it produce coming from the land, or is it living as a nation in the land? And I think that all of these are true in different senses, but we're going to see specific mitzvot as we go forward. So Sophie, if we can see the next source. So the end of Mishnah says, this is apart from the mitzvah of Orla and Kilaim. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Af Chadash. So here we already have a sense of what the Mishnah is talking about, because the Mishnah says that all the mitzvot that are dependent on the land you only are obligated towards them in the land, except for Orla, Kilaim, and Chadash. That these three mitzvot, even though if you are not in the land, you still have to keep them outside of the land. What is Orla? Orla is a special mitzvah connected to trees, that you do not eat from a tree for the first 3 years. You allow it to enroot itself in the land. And this would be true also in Chutz La'aretz. Kilaim means mixing different types of plants together to produce something else, right? Which is done very much today, but to leave the nature as God created it, and therefore don't mix different fruits together. Don't take an apple and a pear and put them together and come out with something else, or genetically, because you're messing up with the creation. And then the final mitzvah is chadash, which is a specific mitzvah that is connected to the wheat, and that there was a sacrifice for the new wheat that was that is part of the process between Pesach and Shavuot. And before this sacrifice is given, you're not allowed to eat any of the new wheat before the sacrifice is given. And according to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, chadash is also relevant, also even in Chutz La'aretz. This actually comes for huge discussion, because when you have different climates, such as in the Nordic countries, and you have wheat that could be growing much earlier, for example, and then suddenly are you allowed to eat flour before that's the time of the sacrifice, right, would come on Shavuot. So we're not going to get into that huge discussion, but we see here that there are 3 mitzvot that are mentioned here that are also, even though they are specifically connected to growth, to plants, to agriculture, they're also relevant in Chutz La'aretz. So we already see that from this, that all of the mitzvot, or the Mishnah is telling us that the mitzvot that are connected to the land are connected to agriculture, as Meir suggested. I don't think the other opinions are wrong, because there are other mitzvot that are not discussed here, just such as the one of having a king, or conquering the land, or other things that are not connected specifically to agriculture. But what we're gonna talk about today is specifically connected to agriculture. Let's go forward, because our time is short. So the Talmud starts discussing the Mishnah. And the Gemara asks, what is meant by mitzvot that are dependent on the land, and what is meant by mitzvot that are not dependent on the land? If we say that a mitzvah is called dependent in a case where it is written in a verse with regard to coming to Eretz Israel, and a mitzvah that is not dependent on the land is one concerning with which the verb coming is not written, as we saw before, it says many times when you are coming to the land. So maybe dependency means when the Torah says when you're coming to the land. So if we say all of that, then we're going to have many mitzvot that are not connected to agriculture that we're not going to be doing in Chutz La'aretz. For example, tefillin, right? Putting on tefillin. It says vayaki v'yacha. So does that mean the Gemara says we're not going to put on tefillin in Chutz La'aretz, in the diaspora, when we are not in the land, right? So another example is the firstborn donkey, in which the verse states bringing in the passage. So you have many mitzvot, but it gives 2 examples here, tefillin and the firstborn of the donkey, in which you have to redeem it, because we have the first of everything is always considered more sacred. So we have the more sacred of the fruit, the bikurim and shavuot, for example, but we also have things that are connected to animals. So, and tefillin. So the Gemara is saying, are you suggesting that anytime the Torah tells us that uses the verse, we are coming to the land, is the only time it's relevant? I think it's obvious to the Gemara that that is not the case, even though it could be. Right? It could be that you can say, well, mitzvot are completely irrelevant outside the land, because the place of the people is in the land. So let's go forward. So Rav Yehuda explains as follows. Rav Yehuda said, this is what the Mishnah is saying. Any mitzvah that is an obligation of the body on the person applies both in Eretz Israel and outside of Eretz Israel. But something that is an obligation of the land applies only in Eretz Israel. So what does it mean, a mitzvah of the body? So if we go back to the question of the Gemara before, so putting on tefillin is obviously a mitzvah of the body, right? Something which you are doing with the body itself is something which is relevant in both in Eretz Yisrael and outside of Eretz Yisrael. But something which is completely connected to agriculture is only relevant in the land. Let's go forward. Okay, so what does this actually mean? So the Gemara continues. So what does it mean? I just skipped forward in the Talmud, but because we don't have time to learn the whole discussion. No, go up a bit more. Go back. Yeah. So what does it mean? From the phrase "in the land," one might have thought that all mitzvot apply only in Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, the verse also states all the days that you live upon the earth. So in other words, we have the Torah, which says to us in the land, but also on the earth. So that we have mitzvot that we are connected to globally, you can say, and we have mitzvot that are connected specifically to the land. But if we look on the negative side, if we go down one more source, then we'll see that the whole Torah is directing us, as we said, going from Sinai into the land. And keeping the Torah is specifically connected to the land. And on the negative side, the Torah says that the land will become defiled if we do not, God forbid, keep the mitzvot. And I'm called it to account for it in iniquity. And the land spewed out its inhabitants. So we see that the connection of the land and the people, and the fact that we are in exile, is directly connected to the fact that we did not keep the mitzvot. Nachmanides, a very famous commentary on this passage, which I didn't bring here because of a lack of time, but he very famously said, and he himself moved from Spain in the 12th century to the Holy Land, and was in Jerusalem, and was in Yafo and in Akko, and among different places where he was in the land. And he says in his commentary that all of the mitzvot that we do outside of the land are only practice. They don't really count. It's quite a strong statement. He says it's not, you can't do mitzvot properly if you're not in the land, because your soul is missing. So only when the nation is in the land, because you see that God says the land will kick you out because you haven't kept the mitzvot properly. So he says, when can we keep the mitzvot properly? Only when we're in the land. And therefore, any mitzvot that we're doing are lacking the spiritual center of them if they're not in the land. This would have a huge consequence if we took this halachically, because that would mean that we're not actually accountable if we don't keep Shabbat outside, because it's just practice. So if I don't want to practice Shabbat, then I don't have to. But I think, first of all, it's not taken at that level in terms of with the Torah, as we learn in the Talmud very simply here, it says we have the mitzvot of wherever we are globally. But this is a very strong spiritual message, saying, don't think that you can really manage to keep the Torah and mitzvot properly without the land of Israel. And I think Nachmanides was also pushing the nation of Israel to say, you're not going to be okay. You're not going to be okay spiritually if you are just setting up your communities as strong as they're going to be outside of Israel, because all of the spirituality is connected. But now let's go back to the practical. What does it actually mean, what the mitzvot of the land? So we have, until now in the shiur, we spoke about mitzvot that are perhaps connected or perhaps not connected to the land. But then we have specific mitzvot that are very, very connected to the agriculture of the land. And this has to do with the social system that the Torah is trying to implement in the people from Mount Sinai in preparation of them entering the land. What does the social system mean? First of all, if we recall the history, our forefathers right? We're all shepherds. So what is a shepherd? A shepherd means that you're grazing off of the blessing of the land, right? The sheep don't graze off of the grown fields, and you're not growing for them in the biblical times. So it's very much the blessing of the land is connected to, right? That's something that you live off of as a shepherd. But there's a difference between that and actually growing produce. Because when you're growing produce, then you have, right, land which belongs to you. But the Torah says no, actually it doesn't. Hashem split up Eretz Israel for the 12 tribes, but within that splitting up the land, the Torah is very clear that the land is only there in order for you to care for others, to care for yourself, but also to care for others. So in every act of agriculture that we have, as well as with sheep and right and with the right growing of animals and shepherding and everything, it's all connected very much to caring for the other, because agriculture is based on the fact that there's always plenty, right? You always have a lot. And as someone who is cutting down the fields, for example, and harvesting, there's always leftovers, because it's not worthwhile for you and that energy that it takes to pick up everything in the fields. That sets up a really strong connection both to the land, but also to caring for the needy. So we're going to see here that every time when you are harvesting the land, if you feel that you are the owner, then let's go to the end. Be reminded that during the Shmita, every 7th year, you're not allowed to grow the land. So every 7th year, you are reminded that the land actually doesn't belong to you. Not only that, every 50th year, we have something called the Jubilee, the Yovel, in which all the land goes back to its original owners. So that there's a system in which you realize that the land doesn't really belong to you. And when you realize that the land belongs to Hashem, and that the blessing of the land depends on you keeping and caring for the needy, then that creates a social system. But we're going to see how many mitzvot are actually connected to this. So let's go to Maimonides, just because he always summarizes things so well. Wait, you skipped one. Okay, so Maimonides puts all of the mitzvot together so that it's much easier from this source to understand how many mitzvot we have that are connected to the land. When a person harvests his field, he should not harvest the entire field. Instead, he should leave a small portion of the standing grain at the end of the field. As Leviticus states, do not completely remove the corners of your field when reaping. So this is called a mitzvah, which is called pe'ah. How much do you need to leave? Actually, we say, right, in the Mishnah in the morning as part of the Sidur, right, when we have the mitzvot that are connected to the poor. So pe'ah is one of the ones listed there. She'en lo shi'ur, there's not a specific amount, because it's up to you, right, to, I would say, both to your economy, but also to your heart. How much are you going to leave over? But the very fact that you're harvesting your land now and you're leaving something there for the poor is a statement in itself. And our rabbis give a suggestion, and they say that it should be 1/60th of the land. It's not a small amount. Think of a field. So, right, 1 out of 60 is not a small. This is your harvest for the entire year that you're going to live off, 1/60th of that is going to be set apart as pe'ah. Okay, let's continue down. And just as one leaves pe'ah in his field, so too pe'ah shall be left in the trees. When he gathers his produce, he shall leave some for the poor. If he transgressed and harvested the entire field or gathered all of the produce of the trees, he should take some of what was harvested or gathered and give it to the poor. So, in other words, you should leave it because that reminds you during the harvesting that you're caring for the poor. But if you forgot, then wherever you have all of your harvest, right, in stacks or wherever you've put it, you leave some aside. this also means that the poor know that that will be their source of income, that whatever happens, it's not that they're going to be having to knock on people's doors like we have today, or asking for charity. They know that they're going to be able to go into the land and just harvest and pick up for themselves what was left for them. Not only, we see that very clearly in the story of Ruth, for example, right? When Ruth goes is sent out by Naomi, and she's sent out to the fields to harvest, it's because this is a given that this rich man, Boaz, is going to leave over from his harvest for the poor. Okay, let's go on, because we have sorry, we skipped the last sentence. Sophie, just the last, go back one more. Yeah, so even if one ground the flour, kneaded it, and baked it into bread, he should give pe'ah from it to the poor. So this is the mitzvah that, right, we know that we have a mitzvah of Chalah that we do till this day, right, in which we take off a small piece. And today, what do we do with it? Anyone? What are we doing with the Chalah?
We make a bread offering when we pick the dough.
Right, and what happens? So what happens, Sophie, with that dough? What are you doing with it?
I take it and I wrap it in silver foil, put it into the oven in the bottom, and then I discharge it afterwards. Double wrap it and throw it out. So don't eat it.
So, right, so why? So that is just a symbolic mitzvah to remind you of what you should actually be doing in the land. Because in the land, you would be taking from that dough and giving it to the poor, right? So in other words, this idea of taking and giving to the poor is part of any type of food that we have, and we have this special mitzvah of Chalah. The same question applies and is halachically today. Is Chalah only a mitzvah in Eretz Israel, or is it a mitzvah only from flour from Eretz Israel, or is it also flour that is grown in the Ukraine, right? And it's a question halachically. But today we'll keep the mitzvah according to our sages wherever we have flour. But for sure, it's a special mitzvah if you have, if you could buy flour, if you had flour that was being sold locally and exported from Israel, it would be a special mitzvah for you to buy it and to use it for Chalah and to do the Afrashat Chalah. But especially if you are in Israel, then don't buy flour from the Ukraine in Israel. That doesn't make sense, right? You should buy flour from Israel. And my brother has a flour mill. So you can buy, and that flour is ground, but also flour the wheat that is wheat and barley that is grown in Eretz Israel. So it's very special. It connects us to the land. Okay, let's see what other mitzvot we have. Let's go down further in the Rambam. Similar laws apply to individual grapes that fall during the grape harvest and to underdeveloped grape clusters. As it is stated, do not harvest underdeveloped grape clusters from your vineyard, nor gather individual grapes that fall in your vineyard. Leave it for the poor and the stranger. So anyone knows a bit about agriculture, so you'll always have clusters that are less developed than the others. So if you send all your workers out to the field on a specific date, so you'll have most of the grapes that are okay, but some that are not yet ripe. The Torah is saying, leave those alone for the poor, which means that 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, your workers are no longer there. You'll have all of these grapes throughout the vineyard, and that's when the poor people will come and they won't have to deal with your workers, right? They won't be climbing, and they'll just know that you have left it for them. Similarly, okay, if a person is binding sheaves of wheat into bundles and forgets one bundle, this is called shichicha, right? So shichicha means that if you have forgotten, right, you've just, you're gathering up the agriculture again, you have 100 bundles and you just forgot one. And one of the workers says, oh no, I've forgotten. You don't go back to pick it up. You leave it there for the poor. Someone's going to use it afterwards. And so we have different mitzvot: leket, shichicha, and pe'ah. Leket means that when you're gathering whatever is left over Okay, shechicha is what you have forgotten, and pe'ah is the corner of the land. Okay, let's go further down. Thus you have learned that they all are provisions that corrected by positive commandments, and if one transgresses and does not fulfill the positive commandment involved, is worthy of lashes. In other words, this isn't just like a nice idea. This is these are mitzvot that are connected to land, and the Torah, as we saw before, tells us if you don't keep this mitzvot, you're going to be kicked out of the land. Because caring for the poor is an integral part of you being a nation in the land. Okay, let's go further down. Just we're short on time. So we also have it in terms of standing grain, and you did not harvest, then you should leave it as well. Let's go down to paragraph 12. So thus it can be concluded that there are 4 types of presents given to the poor in a vineyard: individual grapes that fall, underdeveloped grape clusters, pe'ah, and forgotten produce. Right? There are 3 presents from the grain crop: leket, forgotten produce; pe'ah, and 2 from trees: forgotten produce and pe'ah. So according to the agriculture that you are involved in as a farmer, then you have different mitzvot that are relevant to you, but all of them, right, are connected to the forgotten, or to leaving over, or to leaving a corner for the poor. And we mentioned before that we also have specific mitzvah of chadash, of the new grain, but let's continue onwards. So, okay, so basically we have seen here, right, that what do we have? We have mitzvot that are connected specifically to the process of harvesting from the land. And we mentioned 3 mitzvot, right? Leket, shechicha, and pe'ah that are connected to those mitzvot. But then we have and we also mentioned 2 other mitzvot that are Shmita and Yovel, right? Shmita and the Jubilee. Just to be clear, okay? And this is why there's a difference between the Hebrew and the English book. If one, let's just take Shmita, for example. One says, I'm not going to keep Shmita, and someone, let's say secular, right, is not keeping Shmita and not keeping the mitzvah of Shmita on the land, the 7th year, he decides he's going to harvest as usual. That produce is not kosher. Okay? The produce is not kosher. If one is not doing the mitzvot of the land that we have mentioned, his entire produce will not be kosher. Now, this specifically applies to something called Trumot and Maasrot. What are Trumot and Maasrot? Once you have finished the harvest and you've already left for the poor what you were supposed to leave, now you have the harvest in your home, so you've taken care of the poor. But who you have not taken care of who? You haven't taken care of the Kohanim and the Leviim. Because the Kohanim, the priests, and the Levites were working, they were the spiritual workers, right, in the temple. They didn't have their own land. So since the entire economy was based on agriculture, they're going to, if we don't care for them, so they have parts of the offerings of the sacrifices, it's true. But what fruit are they going to have to eat? So every produce that you had, you would take off a certain amount for, which was called Truma, which was a donation to the Kohanim. And Maasrot, 1/10 was taken from the produce and given to the Levites. So we have different laws that are called Truma and Maaser, in which we're taking from the produce and giving to the Kohanim and the Levim. In the same way that Sophie, right, what you said about the Chalah, in which today we are putting it, right, we can't actually take care of it properly. So we also had, so today also, we don't have the Beit HaMikdash, we don't have the Kohanim and the Leviim working in the Mikdash. So, but we do have the mitzvot. So once we have come back to the land, and the pioneer movement was very much connected to agriculture, and starting up the agriculture of the land. So suddenly these mitzvot come back and are very relevant. So you have Trumot and Maasrot and Shmita, right? All of these mitzvot that are connected very much. This makes a huge difference when you are buying, because if you're used to buying fruits and vegetables that are grown in Chutz La'aretz, in the outside of the land, that we know that as long as we're only dealing with, right, with bugs, that's basically all we're asking. We're asking, right, maybe Chadash, which I said to you, which according to most opinions is not relevant, right? So, but when we learned Kashrut and we learned the halachot of Kashrut, we only talked about, right, the basic rule was saying, well, fruits and vegetables are okay. But now we're making it much more complicated. Because once fruits and vegetables are grown in the land of Israel, so let's just take an example before we talk about in the diaspora, okay? But when we talk about, you go to Israel, you're used to eating, right? And you say, okay, well, I know that if there's a vegan place and it's completely vegan, it's okay. Of course, if I go to a place in Israel, I go to a falafel and it's run by a Jew, then of course it's okay. Not so. Because the fruits and the vegetables, you have to ascertain, you have to make sure that they've taken Trumot and Maasrot from them even today. So luckily for us, the chief rabbinate has a national system in which they are doing this mitzvah for almost all of the produce in the land. So that it's very easy for someone who's running a falafel shop he has a mashgiach, and the mashgiach will tell him where to buy the fruit and the vegetables from, and they'll have a sign which says, right, Tu'udah, have a certificate, and it will say on the certificate, then Trumot and Maasrot were taken from the fruit. Okay? However, okay, and if someone is someone who keeps mitzvot, then you can also rely on the person, right? It's not someone, right? You can do it yourself. The problem becomes much more relevant when you're buying produce directly from the fields, which is very nice, right? I buy every week directly from organic fields that are actually right next to the Gaza border. So maybe it's a double mitzvah today to buy from them to help them in their situation. So we have an organic market, and it comes with a truck, and we buy directly from him. But then, since he's gathering from different farmers there, so it's a question that needs to be asked. I have to ask the question. I also get from up north, which is probably also a mitzvah today. Unfortunately, all our borders are under war. So whatever we can do to support the workers is very important, right, today. However, if we get a bag of oranges directly from the farmer up north, I always have to ask the question, where Trumot and Maasrot taken from it? If I'm in religious communities, if I'm in Jerusalem, then it's not a problem. There's a system there. You talk to the Rabbanut, they help you. It's not an issue. Most of the fruit is gathered by huge companies like Tnuva in Israel, and then there is someone there who is doing the Trumot and Maasrot. But if not, if I have direct produce that is coming from these people, and I don't know if Trumot and Maasrot have been taken, or if I'm taking from my own fruits in the garden or vegetables in my garden, then I will do Trumot and Maasrot. And it's similar to like what you were describing with the Chalah. In other words, I'm not actually I will take a part of the fruit off to remind myself of the mitzvah. I will say a special bracha over it, and I will put it into I will double wrap it because it's sacred, and I will put it aside because I don't have the Kohen and the Levi. Even though I'm a Kohen, for example, I'm not working in the Beit HaMikdash, so we don't have the full mitzvah as it was. Some of the mitzvot are actually connected to the poor and shall be taken and should be put into what is called Maaser Ani, which is a tithe, which is for the poor. And you can either have your own coin, which, right, and you will take it and put that kedusha, the sacredness, into the coin itself, right, for the aniyim, or that you actually have like organizations today that will organize this for you, and they will take care of the Trumot and Maasrot, and they will have the sacred coin, and you can sign up and pay them something symbolic, and then you say the bracha, and you say, oh, well, my coin is, at this organization, and they will make sure to give it what needs to be given to the poor, And we won't have time to get into it, but also there's a special mitzvah of that this coin is sacred. You can't just throw it away in any way, but we won't get into the details. But the point that I wanted to bring forward is that we have a list of mitzvot that are not only dependent on where I am, but they're also dependent on the produce itself. So in this sense, these mitzvot are very much relevant today since we came back to the land. So the huge issue is Shmita every 7th year, because then all of the produce I can't just buy at any place. I have to know that the place is keeping Shmita. And think of that at a national level. Right? I can't just go into it. And if I'm buying fruit from the 7th year, all of the fruit is sacred. I can't throw it out. I'm buying fruit in the shuk. I go to Machne Yehuda in Jerusalem. First of all, I have to know that it was properly dealt with in terms of the Shmita. But then if I'm eating from it and it's sacred fruit, I can't just throw it on the Shmita year, I can't just throw it in the garbage. I have to take care of it in a special way. And maybe we'll have a shiur about Shmita when we get close to the Shmita, because it's a very special halachot. So it creates a different understanding, because I would say suddenly it's not like, oh, great, all fruits and vegetables are kosher. No, it's a much more both strict, but also creates an awareness of my connection to the land. Wait, this tomato I'm eating from the land. It was grown in the land. So was it taken care of properly? And were others taken care of properly before I can put that tomato into my mouth? What does this mean practically? Practically means that when I'm in Israel, it's probably easiest to rely on the Rabbanut, right, on the chief rabbi, and wherever you eat, just make sure there's a sign there that says the Trumot and Maasrot have been taken. You go into the supermarket, the big supermarket chains will all have a sign next to the fruits and vegetables saying Trumot and Maasrot have been taken from our fruit. In every big supermarket chain. So it's quite easy in that sense to keep these mitzvot. But when you're more private, which I like to support private agriculture as much as I can, especially organic, and that goes back to our shiur on sustainability, right? So if we're doing that, it requires more. I don't think one should be nervous. I think one should be excited. We have more mitzvot that we can actually do. We can do the Trumot and Maasrot ourselves, and you learn how to do it, as maybe you were nervous before keeping Kashrut or before keeping Shabbat. It's a system that you learn, and you have to learn about, especially if you're living in the land. Now I'm going to add something which complicates things a bit. Because the fruits and vegetables are connected to the land and not only to the people being in the land, what happens with produce that comes to the diaspora? What happens when I've seen on Facebook a lot of times, it's very nice to see a posting, right? Jaffa oranges are being sold in this chain. Or you can buy Israeli dates now. And it's very important now, especially with the boycott and all of that, to counter the boycott movements and to support Israel. And of course, important. But what happens to these mitzvot? Anyone have an idea? What happens to everything we just discussed? Is it irrelevant if you're in Finland, Copenhagen, Denmark, Sweden? What do you think? Yes, Esther.
Well, I tend to buy as much as I can any product from Israel, if I see in the supermarket, they can be this big, what is that in English? Is no, anyway, the big yellow fruits looks like orange, but not orange. Yeah, and then of course anything where I see that is from Israel, I try to buy. And then we have Iron Smart, where we can also buy Israeli products.
Okay, but what are we going to do about these mitzvot then? Are they relevant or are they not relevant? Trumot, taking the teeth and the donation to the Kohen. Once the dates get on the ship, or the clementine or the orange, do they lose the sacredness by being put on a ship?
They are relevant and should check if it has been done, or then do it by yourself.
Okay, so basically, I think it's again special because, and I don't think it's been discussed enough, in my opinion, in the communities. Because on the one hand, like Esther's saying, we really want to support, and I think it's a big mitzvah to go and support Israel and buy as much produce as you can. But also, it should be special for you that these actually have a sacredness in them, right? And you don't know whether the Trumot and Maasrot have been taken properly. Unfortunately, the export companies that are exporting the food don't go through the chief rabbinate, because the chief rabbinate only has a monopoly of what is being sold in Israel. And for the export, they don't want to have to deal with this because it's a hassle. And why would they will lose a lot of produce. That you think of that, it's a lot. So basically, a lot of it is actually not being done properly. Which if it's a non-Jew who's eating in the diaspora, that's okay. The mitzvot are not relevant. But if a Jew is eating from this, then they have to make sure that the Trumot and Maasrot have been taken. And therefore, the easy suggestion would be to subscribe to one of these organizations, which in which you can do the mitzvah of Trumot and Maasrot, and then you just take a small piece off of the fruit, right? And since you don't know whether it's been taken or not, so you wouldn't say the bracha unless you know for sure that it is not, but you should say the part in which it says, I subscribe part of this as the mitzvah of Trumot and Maasrot, and this would be relevant for any of the produce coming from Israel. And I will look for a link. I'll try to look for one of the organizations that has this in English, so that you can both subscribe to it and also have this to say. And I think it's very special because you can say, oh, great, I got, whatever it is, I got this fruit from Israel. Now we have a special mitzvah that I didn't have before that I can be doing now. But again, don't say the bracha, because it could be that it went through the whole system before it was exported, and you don't know that. Regarding Shmita, it's problematic. Shmita, because you don't know whether the agriculture has actually been done properly and keeping the laws of Shmita, or they violated the land. It's like violating Shabbat. You violated the land by not keeping the Shmita, and it's very serious. It says that Hashem says, I will kick you out of the land if you don't keep these mitzvot. Therefore, there are lists of produce after the Shmita year, because many times it could be even half a year later or more, when the produce of the Shmita is exported to Europe and is going through the system there. It depends. Think how long olives can last, for example, dates, right? So if it's coming from Israel after the Shmita year or during the Shmita year, and you don't know whether it has been taken care of properly, there's nothing you can do to fix it, because the land has been violated. So you're not actually allowed to, that food would not be kosher. So just to summarize, with the laws of kosher that we are used to, we have suddenly a new level that we haven't discussed before, right? Which is mitzvot that are connected to the land. And because it is so integral that the people and the Torah are all connected to the land. So first of all, what we said in this shiur is that every mitzvah is connected to the land and to us as a people. But we have specific mitzvot that are connected as a nation that we cannot do without being as a nation in the land. And then we have some that are connected specifically to the agricultural produce. We talked about the mitzvot of the farmers as they have it, but we as the receivers of the produce also have the mitzvot that are specifically connected to Trumot and Maasrot, to the donations of the what was given to the Kohen and to the Levite, and that is relevant today since Baruch Hashem we're back in the land. And this is specifically relevant when you're in the land because it's very easy. Just go to a supermarket and make sure that there's that you have that it says there that Trumot and Maasrot have been taken. Or when you're eating a falafel, just make sure it's kosher because anyway the person might be open on Shabbat, and and he might be getting produce that has not gone through the regular supermarket system, let's just say. So he should have a certificate of kashrut, or you can ask that question. And then we said that it's relevant also in Chutz La'aretz when you receive in the diaspora this produce, then you also have the mitzvah because you don't know specifically with the export whether it has been done properly or not. And then the last thing we talked about, the Shmita, which is especially problematic both in the land and in Chutz La'aretz. So I hope you leave the shiur. First of all, are there any questions? Because this was perhaps something new to some of you. Any questions? Bivakasha. Yes, Esther.
What about we are living in Galut, and if we know that there are Levi'im and Kohanim, do we support them and give Ma'aser with money or something? How do we do? Because we get salary, could we give Ma'aser to Levi'im and Kohanim, or how do we do?
Yeah, so it's a good question. The Ma'aser that we give today is given to the poor. So we should take from our regular salary and give it to the needy, and that was discussed in one of the previous shiurim. Regarding the Kohanim and the Levi'im, it will be relevant once Bezrat Hashem we have the Mikdash, and they'll be back in the, and I'll have to see what if I'll have time for the Nordic Beit Midrash because I'll be busy in the temple in the Beit HaMikdash, and hopefully you will be in coming to the land as well. So at that point, those mitzvot will be relevant. But today we only give to the poor. And because the Kohanim and the Levim don't have their status and also are not poor, Baruch Hashem, right? So we don't have those mitzvot today that are for the Kohanim and the Levim. Any other questions?
Okay, I have one, but it's more related to the brachot that will change for the 5 simanim, like the dates, the olives, the wine. So right now we say Borei Pri Hagafen, but it will change to Hagafna if it's from Israel. But it's like, how does it apply? Because okay, I can hear myself double. It's more like if we import a wine, let's say from Israel to Denmark, then it will be made in Israel if it's an Israeli wine. So we change the bracha afterwards, or do you understand where I'm coming from?
Yes, that is true. We have a difference in the brachot itself because of the specialness in the land. So in the brachot also, if we know that we're buying a wine from Israel, then that is correct. That we have then we have a special bracha, but we have a small change which says this is from the land, gafna, right? That it's connected to the land itself. So we have a difference in the special fruits of the land that you mentioned. Right, we have Shivat Aminim, but we have 5 of them that are fruits, 5 of the species which are fruits. And then if we're eating dates or olives or wine or grapes, right, or pomegranates in that case as well, and figs. So those are the fruits of the land. So we have a special, there's something unique about the fruits of the land that are directly connected to the land. But the mitzvah, just to be clear, the mitzvah of Trumot and Maasrot that I mentioned are for any food. So if we have anything that is grown in the land, we have to, and we're buying it, even Jaffa oranges, for example. So what I told you today, which is might be not well known, is that we should actually be making sure that you can be doing the Trumot and Maasrot in a similar way to what you're doing in the Chalah. And I committed to finding a guide in English to help you understand exactly how to do it, so that you have another, so that you'll know what to be doing. Okay? Is that clear now, Sophie?
Yeah, it's more that like our Siddur from Denmark, it doesn't like explain anything or like change the Bible for after meals blessing if it's from the land of Israel. It's very hard with the
Yeah.
sound. But it's just something we look up and then all of them change to feminine, or how is it done? But maybe we can just take it in another shiur if we
It's a good point. I will look for a version that has that change, and then I can send it. I can send both it and like the guide sort of for Trumot and Maasrot. I can send it in the email. So thank you. I'll do that, Bezrat Hashem. Okay, so hopefully today we learned how practical our connection is, and special mitzvot that are connected to Israel, to the holiness of the land, how important, how central it is, but also that there's very practical things, and how this idea of living as a nation in the land is so much connected to caring for the other, for the needy, for the poor, for that it isn't about ownership. Being in the land, I would say, I'm not going to get into political, but it's not about occupying and owning. It's about caring and giving, and that is an essence of being in the land of Israel. So, Bezrat Hashem, we will hope and pray for better days in the land in which this sacredness will come out, and that our caring and needy will bring blessing to the land, that we won't have to be fighting for our lives in the land of Israel, Bezrat Hashem. So Chodesh Tov to everyone. Today and tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh, so you have special additions as well. If you have Birkat Hamazon and the Tfilat Amidah, you have Ya'aleh V'Yavo to add, and we have the Hallel prayer as well. You can go back to our Rosh Chodesh shiur if you which is recorded in the channel, and you can listen to that shiur. And be reminded of what we have special for Rosh Chodesh and what it means. But this Chodesh is especially special. Rosh Chodesh is always, but Mi Shenichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. We're coming towards Purim, and it's a time in which the miracle of Purim was that someone really evil wanted to wipe us out, and it turned into a huge blessing and a miracle for us, and that's especially relevant today. So Chodesh Tov to everyone, and Litraot, Shavua Tov.
Shabbat
Chodesh Tov.
Shabbat
להתראות, עם ישראל חי.
שבוע טוב, חודש טוב.